Welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name is Alex, and we're here again for another Hacker Hangouts on another morning. And I want you all to know you did not throw me off this morning with your stupid comments in the last 10 seconds before we went live. I'm on today. I've had like 4 cups of coffee. Oh, I'm feeling good, and we're jumping in with privacy. Is privacy a myth? And I think where this topic came from is we were talking, me and Gower were having a late night conversation. We were having our pillow talk, talking about privacy and security, because that was that's what you talk about late at night. But we were talking about it, and we're like, as time goes on, I was actually troubleshooting a weird DNS issue I was having. It was with Cloudflare, and it hits me. As time has gone on, is privacy even possible in the current, we'll call it, ecosystem? Because historically, when you would want to, maybe like when the internet first came about and you wanted to search for, I don't know, ties, there wasn't like centralized Google or search engines. So you would type in ties.com. But as time has gone on, there's become these like centralized points of the internet where you have to rely on them, whether it's Google to search, whether it's Cloudflare, which a lot of people use as their DNS, or Google as their DNS. You have so many singular points that are starting to form, especially with like Azure and AWS and Google Cloud, where they're starting to become like less and less, we'll say like diversification of resources and more centralized, which means there's more and more centralized places that you have to go to navigate the internet, which means there's less and less places where your connections are going. There's there's more insight into that information. So I kind of like, if you're having to rely on these centralized places, is privacy, are you capable of being private? Because people go, oh, HTTPS, and you can wrap all these layers of encryption, but at a certain point, you're communicating with a centralized, what feels like a centralized authority. Gowrie, is there anything you want to add, like, before we open up the discussion?
Yeah, and I think even in a more general sense, at least within the United States, most people here live in a functional monopoly state with regards to their ISP. So their ISP gets to see most of where their traffic is going, unless they're using some kind of anonymization function, right? Like DNS, like their ISP is going to get the first crack at reading their DNS requests unless they're using DNSSEC. And I think the point here is that even if you have privacy in the sense of like people don't know, or it's like Google doesn't really know what it is you're eventually going to buy. They do, but they don't know based on your search results, or your ISP doesn't know where you're visiting because you're using DNSSEC and you're using HTTPS and you're using all these security layers. At the end of the day, in order to buy something online, you need a credit card. Well, that credit card system is pretty much your centralized intelligence, if you will, where we can, the credit card company knows what you do by nature of them processing your by them processing your transactions. So yeah, that's kind of where this started, where we were saying, is privacy even possible in the modern age, given the fact that if you are online, someone, somewhere, everyone, everywhere is tracking you.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the problems with it, because like you talked about DNS, and like by default, if you're just a layperson who's not like changing their DNS, you're just like going through your ISP's DNS, and by default, it is like those requests are plain text over the internet, unless you go to like DNS over HTTPS, DNS over TCP wrapped in SSL. Like there's secure ways of doing or DNSSEC. But like by default, that information is kind of going out there. But there's also become things like Google Analytics that are installed almost on default by any web host, and Google's the centralized authority on those. I mean, I think that encapsulates the problem. Before we kind of like start pulling that off, Gulo, Gator, do you have anything?
So this is a deep, dark rabbit hole. Can you be private online? If we're just talking about DNSSEC, I'm glad we're focusing on that area, because trying to do online purchasing is a great pivot point. When we're trying to go through and purchase things like going to DEF CON and saying if you want to be somewhat anonymous when you're purchasing your ticket, now that you can do this online, that got a lot harder to do. sure, people talk about, okay, how different cryptocurrency is supposed to be able to go through and do that. You still have to go through an exchange. Most places you're having to put your real identity with your account now, unless you go through many, many hoops. So if you want to be private online, it's a lot harder, takes a lot more work, and it's constant work. It's not just like one and done. So um, it's not always, you have to look at your risk model and find out if it's right for you, because it's not going to be
Well,
that important for everybody at all times.
you mentioned cryptocurrency, and I find that one so interesting because there's a recent group that had, there was the huge, what was it, Bittrex, not Bittrex, the other one, Bitfinex or whatever. There's a huge breach, and then recently there was 2 people arrested, and it was after they had sent the money through like 3 dark pools, through Monero, through a couple exchanges. And it was really interesting to see the documents of how it was tracked all the way through, because in some ways it was, blockchain, they were able to say, okay, here is the address. We know where the money went to. We're going to blacklist or just monitor this address. So when it goes to an exchange, we can notify that exchange. But then there was even like things like Monero, and it will say it like going through the mixers and things like that. They made just really easy jumps in logic where it was like, okay, $140 million went in to Monero.
Right.
And, 5 hours later, 38 million came out to this other section. And it was like, well, pretty easily jumping logic right there. So I think, but that's going to extremes when you're doing like, I feel like crypto is supposed to be protected, but like even just like modern traffic, it just seems to be, it's more and more difficult. Gulo?
So I kind of disagree with the word possible. I think is yes. Plausible is probably no. You can be paranoid, and there are a lot of things that you can do to mitigate how you're being tracked. The question is it really worth it? We don't have, there's not a really big driving factor, because unless you're anonymous, unless you're weird traffic on the internet, then you're just gonna be another number. You're going to be another row in a database. So as long as you're not doing something completely like batshit crazy on the internet, then you're just going to feed in with the trillions and trillions of records that are already being stored. But once you become a high priority, sifting through that big ass haystack for that one needle is still pretty difficult, even for large companies. They aggregate data on everyone together rather than deep diving into single individuals.
So I think the thing I disagree with there is that the fact that it's hard to do that. You have like giant pieces of technology like Athena and things like this in AWS, which is just made to point at an AWS like an S3 bucket, which holds my logs, and then I can massively search. Now, yeah, sure, they don't, most companies don't care about the individual because there's not a lot of value. That's debatable. But a lot of it's the roll-up numbers they care about, because especially like you look at things like YouTube and things like that. What was the quote Schmidt said, which was something like, every single problem we have is a problem at scale. Like spam is a problem at scale. Anytime you have like it's small, like 3%, but people don't like dislikes, like it's going to ban it across the whole platform. Like those are the problems at scale they're dealing with. Gulo?
So there was somebody posted that I follow on Twitter about AI and how you never go find a professional at AI and ask them to solve a problem. Just because they have the data doesn't mean they know how to use the data. And that is the issue there. I don't go to somebody who works strictly in AI to solve one of my problems. I go to whatever the specialist of my problem is and say, hey, how do I fix this? And then I'll bring on somebody after we know what the problem is, how to fix it. Then we see if we can streamline it with machine learning, AI, something along those lines. So just because they have all that data doesn't mean they can use it.
Gary?
This is a total aside. I was just going to say, this is why job postings online are complete bullshit, right? Because they want like 5 of those people in one. We were like, I wanted somebody who's an expert in C++ and machine learning and big data and this and that. It's just like, that's not how any of that works. No, the thing I was going to say is the original proposition here was, can privacy realistically exist in the modern age when everything's so centralized? So everything's going through Google, everything's going through these credit card companies, everything's going through these ISPs who have the capability, the ability to, and do aggregate this data with some amount of identifiability.
Hold on. Gator, you're bleeding very hard into your mic. So this is a great point Gower's making. I just want to make sure it's captured. Yeah. Keep going.
So just to reiterate, right? Like the small companies out there, whatever, they're aggregating some data, but they don't care. They care about the roll-ups. But those big companies, Google, with Google Analytics and ISPs and credit card companies and all of these major players that play a huge role in our lives, but are kind of in the background for the most part, because it's not like you pop up a random website and there's a giant banner that says run by Google Analytics, whatever. All of those players, they're basically intelligence agencies, or they could be if they wanted to, right? Because they could mine all of that data that they have to do functionally anything they wanted. And that's kind of what the thing that Silk and I were talking about was just like, well, realistically, privacy doesn't exist when that is allowed to continue, especially when we live in monopoly markets like ISPs in the United States, where you only have the choice of one, maybe two ISPs in any given area.
I think the thing which compounds this too, which is so interesting, is like, I think at times we look at some of the new third parties coming out. Like we mentioned credit cards a few times. There's like really interesting third parties that are now existing where you can like insert your credit card and then they make like a temporary credit card which links to yours, like, which is really cool for anonymized. But I don't know if that really anonymizes it nearly as much as it provides some sort of security for if that number is stolen. And I think it's interesting because we're doing the same thing with like emails and these other type of technologies, but this is where I'm going to start ranting about like third parties. So I had to fill out like a financial thing for my daughter's schooling. And as I was going through it, like it felt like a massive proctology exam, which was like just wonderfully uncomfortable because it was things like, do you own a car? How much did you pay for it? Do you own this? What's your 401k at? And it gives like so much information went into this system. And I was laughing because it was way more information. Like, you had to upload your tax return, which had my whole family's social security numbers. I don't know where that information's going. I don't know how they're storing it. We're expecting them to do it securely, but then here's where it starts compounding. I don't know what the fix for any of this is, because you have like maybe regulations and compliance like GDPR, which I think have this great like right to be forgotten. Google entered that feature, but does any of these like help? I guess I'll pose the question is like the third party credit cards, the third parties. Hold on, Gator. I know you want to jump in. The third parties which are creating credit cards and the compliance is like, do any of these third parties like help preserve privacy? And then like, how do we maybe like some of the laws that like, are those going in the right direction, or are those just creating work and noise?
Okay, so this has been a deep, dark rabbit hole. Because of my previous employers, I went through and was super, super trying to be secure online, making sure to keep my hacker name as GatorByte separate than my real name, separate than my working name. And for previous employers, that was super important. For current employers, it's not as important. Going through that process, I found this resource called Intel Techniques. This guy used to work for the FBI, and then he quit working for the FBI because he was doing OSINT on folks. And then he started teaching people how to go do OSINT, and he does classes on it and whatnot. This led me down a 4-year study on how to become more private online. And I'm not exaggerating there. I went back to his very first podcast and went episode by episode for 2.5 or 3 years, and then buying his books and listening and reading those as well. So like the privatized credit cards they're talking about, I know BofA did that in the past. Privacy.com does that. The pseudo mail or my pseudo does that. There are a lot of things that you can do, and that does make you a little bit more private online. The problem is it costs you money and it costs you time. So it's not just I'm going to buy this service set and forget. It's something that you constantly, actively have to be working on. I just bought a house with my wife and kids. It's our first home purchase, so yay! Finally there. We finally got to move in. But doing that same process, I'm signing out these forms both digitally and physically, and dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and realizing I'm doing everybody else's work, and they don't care about my privacy. It's literally up to me on what information I am or am not giving, and if it's correct or not doesn't matter. So even to the point where you get down to the notary and they're getting ready to make sure, hey, everything's signed up, checking the driver's license number, expiration date, and date of birth, and the driver's license and the expiration date is the exact same. No, this is wrong. If you don't check your work and if you don't check other people's work, you have no idea where your data is being stored. Um, so in that use case, going and getting a PO box can help in some situations. Um, when it talks about trying to go through and purchase things online, it's a constantly revolving door of how and what you can do this with. So buying DEF CON tickets in the past, if you're going to do it online, you could go pay cash for a prepaid debit card. The Amex ones were one of the best ones you can get down at like Walmart. In the past, about 2 or 3 years ago, it was the vanilla one. The problem is that this changes on what is accepted every 6 to 9 months. So what worked for you last year purchasing your DEF CON ticket is not necessarily going to work this year for purchasing this year's ticket. So it's go ahead.
I was gonna say, do you think any of these actually improve your privacy? And then should you necessarily care? I guess I posed a couple questions like, do these things help? Does regulation help? And then like, should you necessarily care? Gulo?
So go ahead, Gulo.
So as far as when I've read through the laws and the regulations that are coming out, they're fluff. They don't do anything other than appease the masses in the fact that they think they're doing something. Generally, the laws, rules, and regulations are only there to be a smokescreen to say, hey, look, we're trying to do something and we're going to make things better. But for the most part, they don't actually help all that much. If you look at like the GDPR or the fact that on every website I have to click on accept all cookies, or I have to go through some weird rabbit hole where the website never actually properly works because I didn't accept all the cookies. I didn't accept what they were actually saying. Yes, the laws and regulations say I have to have a choice, but that choice is, does the website work, or do I have to go find a different vendor to use because the website is completely unusable or their whole path through this cookie navigation is just broken?
And I wanted to toss this in many cases, if you go read the laws, this is really bad. They place these regulations on large entities but exempt small entities, and the reason for that is if they didn't do that, it would be impossible to start a business, right? And so they recognize it's, regulatory capture says, basically like the big businesses can functionally write the laws, and if they write it in a way that prevents small businesses from popping up, they don't have to compete. And so that's basically what happens and why they exempt these small businesses, which means like, yeah, you go to Google and you're more private on Google, but if you go to like any of the other small startup search engines, they may not be ruled by it yet because they don't have a certain market cap, which is kind of crazy if you think about it.
I mean, in some ways, like the Gator brought up a point, which is the laws are always behind. But I mean, we would be having the exact opposite conversation if it was the laws are always ahead, because the laws are meant to be there to like we'll say reactive to a lot of the things technology. But if you just like preemptively came up with all the laws and regulation trying to think of the future, I feel like that would just be massively hampering.
This may go down a different path that I don't want to touch on too much, but look at the people that are creating the laws. They are, and I'm going to be as offensive as I can, they're 100 years old and they don't know how to use technology. And they are relying on people that are paying them money to dictate to them what they don't know and understand and choose not to know and understand. If you look at like net neutrality and the FCC, if you look at pick any of the technology laws out there, The vast majority of them are paid for by lobbyists, written by lobbyists, handed to somebody who's illiterate to vote on to make it become law.
But I would
Yeah,
actually
I mean,
go on, Goward.
No, I mean, like, I just watched. So Lewis Rossman, if you guys don't know the Rossman group, they're the computer repair group on YouTube, and he just posted this video, and it's from my state. I'm in Maryland. There was an assemblyman in the Maryland legislature that just put the Maryland just put down the Right to Repair Act and basically disapproved it. And there's videos of this assemblyman who was running the committee basically getting up and saying, well, revealing the schematics for a board is equivalent to revealing the source code, and it's going to help malware writers. And I'm just like watching this video of him talking about that and asking questions. And I'm like, how can this person possibly be in charge of this committee? He is ignorant of the entire, of how computers work in its entirety. And he's dictating to professionals how it works. It's beyond me that it's not beyond me. It's bribery, right? Like as he said, lobbyists from large corporations spend the money and campaign contributions to push through these laws that help them attain regulatory capture. That's what it is.
I mean, in some ways, though, I asked a question. Some of these concepts, like network neutrality and things like that, and because some of that does tie back to privacy. This is a whole nother discussion in and of itself. And I'm not necessarily, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I do think there's a lot of nuance to these things because let's use Google as an example. Let's use Amazon as an example. Say you didn't have any tracking whatsoever within Amazon. Like, in some ways, we've already talked about how the tracking is incredibly broken. If I buy one blender, Amazon, I'm talking to you right now because I know you watch this channel. If I buy one blender, I only need one blender. I don't need to be recommended for more than one blender. I just need one. I'm not like hoarding blenders in my house. But I like the fact that some of these advertising engines do make customized ads to me, and the way they do that is through tracking, whether through my orders or things like that. But if we go like network neutrality and things like that, I don't necessarily know if that's going to fix a lot of, we'll say, some of the privacy issues because we are centralized. Like, you have Azure, you have AWS, you have Cloudflare, and all of a sudden, like, in some ways, I don't want them, like, advertisers controlling the internet. In other ways, you start getting things like the opportunity to do, like, free and open internet, or free internet. Maybe not open internet, but free internet.
Well, so
go ahead.
Look at it not from Amazon or Google, look at it from the ISPs. If you look how Comcast has actually done their purchasing and how they've hampered technology in the United States as far as the internet goes for decades now, because they are a monopoly. They've gone through, they've built out all of this antitrust everything. They've squeezed out competition, they've raised their rates, and we have incredibly crappy service. The US used to be one of the fastest and best internets places in the world, and now I don't even know where we rank, but I don't even think we're in the top 10 anymore. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely horrible. And it's because these companies are lobbying and combining and pushing out any and all competition, and they're becoming conglomerates. So yes, you've got your Google, you've got your Amazon, but you have the things that people don't pay attention to, which we touched on before, is the ISP. The ISP knows so much about you, and they have control over what you can see, how you can see it. They can throttle your bandwidth. If you go to somebody who's a competitor, they can. This was a huge issue with Netflix. They wanted to fight away from cable. They wanted to make people watch cable rather than Netflix, so they were throttling Netflix for a long time. And this is still an issue now. It hasn't gotten any better. It's people don't realize how big of an issue it is, and because they don't realize, we're not doing anything about it.
Well, let's split to what can be done about it, because I also think this is the segue to things like GDPR and other compliances and other laws, because I actually do think those play I'll actually even go out and say a vital role in this, because right now there's nothing. I'm not saying GDPR is like the best thing or any of these privacy regulations, but it's a step towards right to be forgotten for privacy online, because it's better than what? Nothing? Like, would we prefer nothing besides GDPR?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we would prefer, some amount of progress, and progress is always going to be slow, and it's going to be slow. It's going to be even slower with how fast society moves and how slow our legislatures as a whole move, right? So, I don't want to like poo-poo the GDRP and poo-poo any amount of progress, but it is really hard, and I'm going to use this phrase that I hate using, but it's really hard to be a technologist, if you will, and watching how slow legislature progress goes compared to how fast the technology goes. It really, really hurts. And part of that is because, you know, most of our legislature predates the technology by quite a bit. And that's no fault of their own. And I'm not insulting. It's just like, we have an innate feeling of problems because we grew up with them, as opposed to somebody who's 70 years in Congress, lived through the development of it, and could pick and choose what technologies they decided to adapt along the way. Whereas we just got thrown into the pool. It's why maybe it's more apt to say that we as younger people in our 20s and younger, or 30s and younger, have never really gotten the choice to be private. Maybe as a millennial, where I grew up as a young kid, where the internet still screamed in pain at you when you logged on. Maybe I was the last group that had a choice as to whether or not to be private. But a lot of the Gen Zs and whatever the next generation is, I don't even know what they're calling them, they didn't really get that choice. Camera phones were ubiquitous. Everyone has a Facebook or a Twitter or a TikTok profile, and if you don't, you're not part of society at that point. And so the question, I suppose, is, the people in Congress had the choice of privacy to some extent. Did we have the choice of privacy? I don't know the answer to that, but did the generation after us have the choice of privacy? I would say no. By default, they didn't have any choice in whether or not their lives were private. Society made that choice for them.
That I completely agree with. I'm old. I'm probably the oldest one on this stream, maybe by double, because you're all youngins. Get off my lawn. But I grew up in the day before the internet. I mean, I'm like dinosaur old, and I don't have I have a Facebook because it was required for me to stay in touch with family and friends from like high school from way back in the day. I haven't logged into Facebook in months or years. I have my Twitter that I post on every once in a while. I have TikToks that I'll do every once in a great freaking while. And I'm horrible at technology. My phone I use as a phone. I text on it, I check email, and occasionally I'll answer a phone call or make a phone call, but very rarely. I don't have a ton of apps.
Bring
I
this
don't
back
have a
to
ton
bring it back to the question though, which was
Right.
Gowrie said, is there privacy for, we'll say, the younger generation then? Because you're talking
But
about how you use it.
Yeah, but all of these apps and stuff are things that everyone else is using and installing and processing through. How much every single piece of software that you install, every service that you're using is tracking you in some form or fashion. Everything on your phone is designed to track information, whether you paid for the app or not. And the generation uses everything. They are highly integrated in with all of the technology, with the social medias, and they more care about speed and entertainment over everything else. Standard TikToks are dropping down to 7 to 30 seconds in length, and that's just because they're wanting to pack more and more and more and more and more information in there, and basically shrink your attention span so that you're just clicking on things randomly, installing things.
Let's pull it back to this though, which is, one, do you have a right to privacy? Like, is that actually like an inherent right? We've wanted to talk about like, do you have a right to the internet? But like, is privacy a right that you actually are allowed to keep? Because again, you sign up for TikTok, you sign up for these, you're giving up your privacy voluntarily. But sometimes, like, if it is a right, then when I have to go and I'm forced to fill out some sort of online form or online let's say my property taxes. I need to pay my property taxes online. I have to create a username and password. I have to now trust this third-party portal with some of my information. But if it's a right of privacy, then there should be restrictions enforced on them so they can't just sell my information. Is it a right? Is privacy a right?
I don't believe so, and I don't think it's because of technology. Social security numbers were not designed for the usage that we use them today. Driver's license numbers were not designed for the usage that we use them today. The fact that we had to provide so much personal information out there for anything, it predates the technology. Look at the phone books. The phone books had every phone number, name, and address in them, and you could just look them up. We always assumed we had a right to privacy. We always assumed that we were private people, but we never actually looked at the things around us to realize that we've never really had privacy.
So is it a right? It also depends on what state that you're living in, right? Because much like when we were talking about GDRP, as a Californian, we have
really quick. It's GDPR. I
sorry.
think I said it wrong. I think really quick. I said it wrong first. I will fall on that sword, but I will not continue to keep doing it, or someone's going to pull the things out of the stream and be like, they're talking about privacy and they're saying it wrong. So someone is wrong on the internet. I need to correct them. Go on, Kate.
So there's something in California called the California Consumer Protection Act, or the CCPA. If you live in California, you're able to go through and ask for any of the data that's being kept on you and see where it's been sold to whatever company. So as a Californian, I have more rights than other folks, and other states are starting to look at this. I think Illinois is the other one, because Digital and I have talked on this at length inside of our Hull on Network podcast, talking about what are privacy stories going on week by week. So there is some need of this. It's being viewed, and I think probably why California is the first ones, because all the big tech giants are here. So it's interesting to see. Is it the CCPA does not have nearly as much teeth as the European GDRP has. So PR. Thank you. I'm gonna keep on messing that up now. It's now ingrained opposite. But anyway, so with that, we're starting to make progress, but we've got a long way to go.
I mean, I don't even know necessarily like what the right way would be. And I think, like, again, if we had a sponsor, you know what it would be. It'd be like one of these crappy VPNs. It'd be like, now use our VPN and you have private connection. Like, it's funny because I have this conversation, like, what feels like weekly. And I think it needs to be said is, like, does a VPN protect your privacy online? Like, does Tor protect your privacy?
This is an
online?
excellent segue in today's sponsor, Garbage VPN. Do you want to pay money for no value? Subscribe to Garbage VPN. Oh, I'm sorry. Just describe every VPN service.
I feel like we actually have to spin up Garbage VPN. Oh, it'd be a beautiful thing.
So when people talk about using VPNs, they have different reasons for using it. And if my grandmother is talking to me and asking, hey, I want to be able to make sure I'm secure online, I keep on getting advertised XYZ. It's like, okay, try turning on this VPN. Try going to your banking. You can't, because now they're blocking whatever big, massive whatever is going on, versus if you have a privatized, so like you're spinning up a DigitalOcean droplet or a Linode droplet, or pick whatever AWS service that you want and have an IP address there, and you pivot through that, you may be able to get to those sites. But then it gets to, okay, you've got privacy from your laptop or your phone to this digital droplet or another server that you own someplace else. So maybe it's encrypted from there to there. You've still got to trust whoever their upstream is on when you're trying to connect to your end, banking or whatever else.
Oh, so by the way, I looked down and noticed our viewers just like skyrocketed. Thank you for whoever rated us. I really much appreciate it. It's great to have you all here. This is fantastic. We're talking about, so I'll jump in for anyone who just jumped in. We're talking about, is privacy a myth? Like, can you have privacy online? Whether it is the solution compliance, is it laws, is it some newfangled VPN? It's not. We've already talked about it. It's most definitely not. Is there ways to become private online? And is privacy a right? And actually, that's the question which we just landed on. So I'll ask you, is privacy a right? Is it something you should have access to, or do you automatically give it up the moment you go online?
I'm gonna pop in with my answer, which is a little more nuanced. in the sense that, do I think privacy is a human right? I think privacy is to some extent a human right. However, is it a right in the sense that the government acknowledges it as a right? Absolutely not. In no way, shape, or form does almost any government in the world acknowledge privacy as a human right. And even if they say they do, they have many policies, as you guys said, and many things you have to jump through hoops and give them your data to do, that anyone who claims that this is the case is just functionally wrong. Every time you go to fill out a mortgage, you have to share your details, not just with the bank and the seller, but there's like a whole process that you have to go through, that all you, when you say you have no idea where that data is going, that data goes to a whole host of regulatory agencies at the government that review the sales and have access to your information and are able to do this thing. So do you have a right to privacy? I believe it is a human right, but I don't think it is protected as a right in society today in any way, shape, or form.
So I have a question along those lines. So the haircut fish said privacy is a right until you click agree on the first terms and agreement. My question is, can you sign away a right? If I have a right for the law, can I sign that right away to where I no longer have that right?
Or can you pull, even if you could, can you pull it back at any point? And I guess that would, part of me goes is, because the laws, we've already talked about this a little bit on stream already, is the laws lag behind a lot. So if you have a contract which says, hey, you're going to do this ridiculous thing, it's a written contract. It's going to be for like a judge to necessarily say, does this stand up? And then start, there's not a lot of precedent for privacy. Like there is in some ways, but for internet privacy, I feel like it's probably pretty light.
But even if even if I took the word privacy out of it, any other rights that we have granted to us by whatever higher authority, can we sign those away? And if we can sign those away, as you said, can we revoke that contract? I signed a contract to go work at a job. They cannot force me to work at that job because that's considered slavery. So I have the right to be free and not work if I choose not to. But can they force me to do that? Can I sign away that right? And for the most part, I would say no, minus the whole nurse incident that happened a couple of months ago. But can you actually sign away rights that you have? And if you can't, then privacy is most definitely not a right.
Well, that one, I'll say it's cut and dry, though. And then I think I'm going to hand it back to Gator, is certain rights are inalienable. Like you can't take them away. It doesn't matter, even if you sign them in a contract, you can't take them away. But we're talking about like internet privacy. That is not like a declarative right in writing. So can you give that one away, I think is what you're asking. Gator.
So to that point, though, whenever we're talking about giving permissions, and it's finally gotten around to like on the different apps on the mobile platforms that we're using, you can say, hey, only use or give permissions for this app while I'm using it, or never use it, or always let it. The problem is right now when we're clicking I agree or put a cookie on my machine or whatever else, we're not saying for a given time. So where data brokers have gone through, collected this data, sold it to other people, so they're collecting money off of it, including everybody down to like even your driver's DMVs. When you go in and change your address or whatever else, they're selling the people's data to whomever wants to buy this thing, and your information is out there. If you don't know who it's being sold to, that's one step, let alone trying to even stop it right now. So a lot of people have gone through and tried to put, it's called planting your flag. And if you don't have an account somewhere, somebody else could go take over your account instead. So instead, you plant your flag, even though you don't want to be on LinkedIn, even though you don't want to be on Facebook. If you don't go name and claim that profile, somebody else could. So this gets into a cat and mouse. You don't want to be there, but if you don't take it, somebody else can impersonate you now as well.
This brings up a great point, actually, because this is something Gowrie. Me and Gowrie had a great conversation, because when I first started my YouTube channel, should I use my handle? Should I use my real name? And I knew my real name is now attached to my handle, and was already attached, but my name is attached to my business. My business is my business address. And that, like, I'm now worried, like, what happens if someone, like, gets my address? And then Gowrie did two things. He said, first, he goes, who cares? Like, no one cares. Like, should we care about privacy? No one cares. Like, if it's like one of those things, like if ever someone sends me my address on Twitter, it's like, great. You're disclosing my address to me? I already know it. Just make sure you let me know when you come by, and I'll hang my butt out the window so you can see it. Like, who cares? And in some ways, it's also like, the more presence you have online, the more you get control over your own, we'll say, persona online. Like, we'll use my father as an example. He doesn't have a Twitter, but if I spun one up for him and started just over the years talking as if I was him, it gives more and more credibility to that, like, fake online presence. And all of a sudden, now, does he have a sense of privacy? Like, did I somehow steal some privacy, even though it's not even something related to him? But going back to my channel, like, should you care about privacy? Do you care about privacy online, or is that just like, meh, I've given it up?
So I agree with that. As long as you're not strange traffic, then no one cares. You're just another needle in the giant haystack. Can you be directly targeted? Probably.
Do you care? Like, to forget about anyone else. Do you care about your privacy online?
To Gulo.
Me, no. My crap's been online for freaking ever now. For me to clean that up would take far too much time and effort. It's semi easy to find me. Yes, I'm a private person, but generally it's not that hard to find me. Now, there's a story that I did. It's a quick story. I put my mother in a home years and years and years ago. She broke out, but one of the issues she had was she had really poor cell service inside the home. And so what I told her to do, and this is mining of privacy information, this is mining of data and then processing the data, but because they were just ones and zeros in a database, no one noticed until they did this trick of, when you're talking on the phone, just call some random person, talk with them for a minute or two, walk over to your microwave, open your microwave, toss your phone in, close the microwave door. Wait a few seconds, pull your phone out, make that call again, and then do that again. We hung up signs around the actual nursing home of, hey, this is what you need to do. And what happened is the cell companies, and I won't list the names of the cell companies, came out and actually put a tower out, a femtocell, within a couple of blocks of that nursing home so that they would have that. They become the anomalous traffic. They became that strange traffic that warranted somebody to actually look at.
I have no idea what you're talking about right now, Kulo. The piece I'll actually like pull out of this, though, which I found interesting, was like, this was a story from DEF CON talking about that someone threw up like their own cell tower effectively, because it was the strongest one. Everyone started connecting that, but like part of that was encrypted, but it also was like things like your text messages are now going through that. I mean, that's cut and dry illegal. You can't do that, but it does bring up the point of like, these are privacy attacks, like the moment you man the middle and things like that. And there are security things you can do to prevent that. We're not even necessarily talking about like illegal things. Yes, this in CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability, confidentiality. That's your privacy right there. If you break that through any means, yeah, sure, it's illegal. But going back to like, the question is, with privacy, like you bring up a point though with ISPs, cellular, and things like that, we are becoming more and more connected. Is the only way to have privacy just completely unplug. And is there a way to function in this world if you completely unplug? Now, before we jump in, oh gosh, this is going to sound so much like a sponsor. As we've been talking internally, by the way, we spun up a Discord server. I know everyone they're like, know what I need more in my life? Another Discord server. We're going to spin one up. I'll leave it in the description down below. We're getting it set up now, mainly because we're finding this need to be able to like talk to the community in between live streams, whether it's, hey, here's what the idea is for this live stream. Does anyone else have any other ones? But also like this thumbnail that you're seeing right now, these things don't just happen. Usually I have a lot of back and forth with the other guys, but some of the best ideas we've had for thumbnails have come from the community. So feel free, please join if you can, because we sample those topics, we sample the thumbnails, and you get a little bit of a preview. And if you have questions for us, obviously you can. So I will leave that in the description down below. And next week is probably when we're going to push it live. So I'll hand back the talking stick, as it were, to Gowrie. What do you think about what do you think's next year? And I'm just putting you right on the spot.
That's the
we were talking. I think when it comes down to privacy, is the best way to have privacy online just to completely unplug? Is that even an option anymore?
Yeah. So there's two things. There's like what I was saying is like there is I think, and maybe I haven't really put it this way before, but conceptually there may be this balancing act between having control over your identity in society and privacy. The more private you are, in theory, you have fewer controls over your identity in general. Now, in that sense, I don't mean this in the sense of like you're less likely to, have identity theft be, caused against you. That's not what I'm talking about. What I actually mean is, the ability to prevent people from impersonating you effectively. And so for people like, I don't know, government officials, they give up the right to privacy because they become a public figure. And it actually necessitates that they have almost all of these Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts and all these things. They're like basically, as part of their job, they're required to have them, because otherwise someone's going to make it and, tank their career, because it's going to make them look like they're, batshit crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I haven't really thought about this way. Is it possible to completely unplug in modern society? I'm sure it is. But as Gator, going back to what Gator was saying much earlier in the stream, is like, that's a lot of work, right? And when you talk about, if you want to become, who are the people in Pennsylvania? I'm totally losing my train of thought. Like the people with the most privacy.
The Amish.
Yeah, the Amish, right? Yeah. Like if you want to have the most privacy you possibly can, go join an Amish community, right? But then you're an anomaly within the larger society. And so people could they know roughly where you live, and they could just go find you, right? And so are you really anonymous, and do you actually have privacy in that situation?
At that point, though, too, you're now going, okay, I mean, again, not knowing about obviously knowing about the Amish, not knowing like how they deal with things like health insurance and whatnot. Like you have to have health insurance, I would think. Maybe they don't. Maybe they're just like... I won't touch that.
There's probably a specialty service that services all of those things just for them, just to be clear. And I think that's really cool that that's possible in modern society. Like, I think that's something we should embrace. But, basically the question was, is unplugging possible? I think it's possible, but it's an absurd amount of work for the average person.
And Chad, if you think you can go offline, but at what cost? What are those costs to your privacy? I guess that comes down to a personal choice. For me, no, I'm too immersed in technology. I've grown too far dependent on it. And I think that's a good point. Is like, I know for me, I am dependent on technology. I mean, the moment, like even things like, what drives me nuts though, is like, I have adopted a few IoT devices, and again, security aside, and every one of them requires an account. Now, one piece of privacy I feel like has become more prevalent but more centralized is things like SSO. Like you have Google and Facebook and Apple who have now become like the portal to the world when it comes to SSO. In some ways, you're giving up your privacy because now they're getting audit of that log, but at least like you're not creating accounts on these other systems where then they get breached and you get credential stuffing in. But in some ways, every one of these new devices that you're getting plugged in, those are opening your privacy as well. Gulo?
Okta.
Yeah, sure. Okta. Yeah, and then they were breached.
Everybody gets breached.
Everything was breached.
Yeah, it's one of those things though. It's like your email. If someone gets into your email, they get into everything. Forget Okta altogether. Just like any email account you can get in, and then like, oh goodness, I don't want to like completely get us off stream, but
do it.
Off topic. But like this is a whole nother one. At one point, like your email is protected with a password. Now, Gmail and things like that have increased this with two-factor and things like this. But like all the legacy crap, like this happened to me and Gowrie. So like I have another video on my channel talking about how I hacked Noah Kagan, which was, someone I met through like a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, an acquaintance. But effectively, he's a multimillionaire. He asked me to hack him. We kind of went back and forth on like terms, rules of engagement, things like this. And in an afternoon, it was because his Gmail account is so old. It was like 4 seconds online, went through my databases, found a breached account he had, and Google had their old reset ability. So if you just typed in an old password they had, you could reset it because all this legacy crap is there. So I'll pull this back and then got into his account, got into multi-million, and then you'd start resetting bank accounts and things like that. But like, let's talk about that. Regardless if you want to be private online, I don't think there's a way of pulling it back. And that's what kind of terrifies me. There's no pulling it back. You have legacy code, you have legacy data out there. Even with like ISPs like holding data, they hold SSL v3. I don't know why I'm pointing back here. Like this is the past, if you're wondering. But they hold SSL v3 data, which can then be decrypted later on. Like with all that legacy code and legacy data, I wasn't thinking this at the beginning of the stream. I am thinking it now. I think privacy has gone. Like I think that's where I'll leave it for myself. I think privacy is gone the moment you enter into this world, and it goes back to something Gowrie said, which I think is so perfect. I think if you were born like within the last 5-10 years, you're screwed for privacy. Like I know this sounds like such defeatist attitude, but like if you're born at that point, you're screwed for privacy, and hopefully laws will come about that can try and protect those individuals.
So to your point, after doing this 4-year deep dive on trying to make myself more secure online, keeping my different profiles separate, my job has changed to where I'm not having to worry about that as much. My evil mother-in-law is no longer a threat at this point because I have real threats. And that's the thing is this takes risk modeling. It's going to be important for some people. It's not going to be important for other people. But if you're looking at the current internet and the iteration of we are still connected around the world, except for the Great Firewall of China, Russia is now starting to cut themselves off. We've had a free and open internet around the world to where we could video call and chat with somebody, even if we weren't in the same language, have a translator app and be able to have a conversation around the world. That also means for our privacy side, literally everybody can touch it. So when I'm talking about my privacy is already wrecked out there because of how many times it's been breached and has been posted online. But then when I'm looking at my wife or my kids, early days, my first kid, we put pictures online of when they were born and yada, yada, yada. Later on, it's like, no, this isn't good. And the other family members are like, oh, we're just carrying on and just literally feeding the machine with data. And it's like, okay, you can't take that back. Where's the revoke after 1 week button or share with your family? And then for me, it goes to the open source side of saying, hey, do you want to spin up your own thing? How easy is onboarding somebody into the open source, like Mattermost or whatever else? It's harder than hell. Come on, we got to do better.
I need to comment on this one because Security Live brings up just an awesome, hilarious point on this one. What percentage of people paid to unlist their phone number and address when phone books were a thing? I find this hilarious because this was a self-created problem. Like, this was when YouTube, like, really quick, I didn't know this until like recently that YouTube actually was started as a dating website, which I think is amazing. But YouTube didn't have ads. They introduced ads, and then they came out with the premium service to get rid of ads. The phone book didn't exist. They came out with the phone book, and then you had to pay to get your information revoked. It's going to be hilarious when privacy comes to such a head with all of these companies that it's a premium service to protect your privacy. Like when Twitter comes out and says, we won't share your ad revenue if you're a premium customer. Like that's when it's going to just become, well, I mean, I guess in some cases, Gmail already does that. That's what Google Suite does. G Suite does.
Yep. And you know, maybe I'll leave you guys with an upshot. If there's one upside to anything, it's that when climate change eventually causes society to collapse, none of this will matter. So
It's okay
Well,
when
all you
we're all
guys
stuck.
we'll all get privacy back when the internet stops existing because society has eaten itself.
I mean, this is what's great about this. It's like, in some ways, like it's funny. In other ways, it's so sad because you're going like, you know what? This sounds like a tomorrow problem. This sounds like the future. I've been doing this so much with work lately. This sounds like the future Alex problem. And you look back and you're like, you suck. Like in so many ways. So like, yep, privacy. That sounds like a big problem. We'll figure it out tomorrow.
It's so
Okay,
I still go back to the point of, if I'm in the forest, you can't see the forest through the trees. If I am in those giant databases with all that information, I am just we killed Gator. I am just another person. I am completely anonymous inside the sea of traffic. And for them to single me out is going to take a lot of effort on their part and a lot of processing to do that. No one cares about the individuals. But as you were talking about the Amish before, they are an anomaly. They are a piece of society that is very specialized, and because of that, a lot of people know they exist. The more that you become an anomaly, the more that, I really can't say that word. I don't know why.
No, you're nailing it.
The-
I know what you're talking about.
The more that you become oddball traffic, the more that people are going to notice you. As long as you fit into the mold and in society, then no one pays attention. You can create misinformation, you can create false trails, and your privacy is hiding in the school of fish, in the sea of society, in the sea of humans. Gators, all of Gator's pictures from when his children were born, that's a standard thing. I wouldn't be able to pick out Gator's children in a lineup from any other amount of children or babies from a lineup. Could I probably trace it back and identify it? Yes. But
this is the second stream where you talk about children and tracking children far too much, and we're attracting the weirdest attention on this channel. I think there's Gator, you're bleeding again into your mic. I think one of my favorite features in Burp Professional, for anyone who uses like web hacking, web proxies, there's a feature in there which is simulate traffic. And the main reason it actually was created was for if you were Gator, you're still going. One of my the reason why it was created was to simulate traffic. Like, so if you stepped away for lunch, it looked like you were continuing to test. I'm wondering, I'm sure there is an open source project where you just like run it on your computer and it just starts doing random web queries and random posts and random purchases. I don't know. I doubt it would be all that effective because Amazon is tracking purchases, but like just randomly hitting zillions of pages on Google Analytics, it would probably be a fruitless effort, but it would be interesting to see if something like that actually existed.
So the last thing I was going to say is, hiding in the hoard of traffic and all that stuff is an interesting idea. But philosophically, we're kind of talking past each other in some sense, because what you're saying is these large entities like Google, like Amazon, like all ISPs, etc., they have all this data, and that we should just sort of implicitly trust that they're not going to use the powers that they have against us. And I find that to be, very unsettling as a philosophical concept. The reason why we have traditionally placed those powers with the government is because the people, at least in theory, own the government, and we have the ability to make those changes, as opposed to private corporations, which once they amass that power, they can leverage it in ways that they have, the average person has no recourse against them unless it's through the government. And so it's a philosophical argument, right? And so like, I agree with you in practice, the way you stay anonymous online is by fitting in with normal traffic and looking like everyone else, and managing your identity in a fashion that doesn't make you stand out. But more philosophically, and more the basic question of, do we have a right to privacy in society, comes down to, how is the government going to force those large corporations who have amassed that information on people? how are they going to force them to act towards the individual, right? And that's why I say, like, Google and Facebook, like Facebook is the most successful intelligence agency in human history. The end.
So
Because they just got everyone to give them the information.
I 100% agree with you. I'm not detracting from that at all. The data is out there. And because the data is out there, how can I hide myself, or how can I not be completely sectioned out? If the data was not out there, or we could retract that data, then yeah, don't give up that data. They shouldn't have that data, but they do. So how do you actually work around that?
See, I think that the haircut fish, I've seen this name so many times and I just love it. Thank you for joining stream. It's people like you who I love. Thank you. Is under the thought of zero process is trust is earned and they're not entitled to trust. I think this is like goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is these companies don't start as billion-dollar companies, which in some ways I guess some of them jump up pretty fast. But when they're small to, like, we'll say, foster new technology, they don't have the privacy regulations. They're not required to do it by law, and they don't care. Like, if you're an ice cream shop, security's job is to sell ice cream. Like, everyone at the company, the goal is to sell more ice cream. Like, I know it's kind of upsetting in some ways, but when they're a startup, they don't care about privacy. And if you want to use them earlier, there's no implicit trust. And I think that's where I agree with what you're saying. But I don't know if it's possible if you're like a technologist, which I think most of the people I would say on the stream are technologists. They like trying out new things. They like innovating. They like discovering new things. Like, I think one of my favorite things about this field is the I don't know. Like, it starts out with, like, I feel like other people are like this disgust, like, I don't know. Like, it's like, I don't know. I get to figure it out. I love that about this field. But I think when you're in that mode of discovery, you're giving up a lot of trust, especially with these new technologies. And I don't know. I don't know if privacy. I think privacy is a myth, unfortunately. And I think that's probably the place where we're going to start wrapping up. So, like, let's go around and let's wrap up. Before we do, though, I do want to say thank you so much for everyone who joined. Thank you for the raid. It was very much appreciated. I will be adding the Discord link once we get that set up, because we would love to talk to you more, and I would love just to share some of these ridiculous thumbnails. I apologize. That was the best picture I could find, and the swimsuit was skin-colored. I'm sorry. Kind of, but not really. With that, Gator, where do you want to leave us?
All right, so after trying to be private online for years, and
we're going to go over to Gowrie first, because your mic sounds like a toaster, maybe a potato. You want to unplug it and try one more time?
I'm gonna sign off with delete computers, return to monkey. That's
Clearly,
how you get your privacy back. Delete computers. I mean, or just wait or wait about 28 years and climate change will do it for us.
What about you, Gulo?
Microwaves. They're not just for Jell-O anymore.
And with Gator, what do you got for us? Oh, he's going to just be talking to himself. I'll start wrapping us up, and maybe he'll pop on in. Thank you for... Oh, and there we go. We'll do one last try before we go ahead and sign off. Gator, what do you got for us? Nothing. Nothing whatsoever. That's what you got? Thank you for watching, as always. He's going to say, love your hacker family. That is what he is saying right now. Thank you so much for joining us on this Hacker Hangouts. Really do appreciate it. We do this every week at Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you for watching, and hack on.